super scary because I don't know where I am. I don't know if I'm dead. I don't know if I'm alive. I don't know if I'm in hell, in a different galaxy. I have no idea. I can't explain what's happening.
Ooh, I gotta go. I've been working, told them please don't hit my phone. I'm in my zone, bruh, just leave me alone. Was on the road, but I swear I'm coming home. Now the drinks on me, I think we need a toast. See, I did it for me. Now my old friends calling, told them nothing's for free. Told me time is money, dog, swear I paid all my fees. I was starving for this game, now my family can eat.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Couple of Nurses show here with your hosts, Peter and Matt, two nurses on a mission to change this world one conversation at a time. Thank you for tuning in. If you find value in the show, please share and review the show. It would mean absolutely everything to us. CoupleNurses.com for the latest updates, merch releases, and anything else about us. For our lifestyle podcast, you can check out wearefrontlinewarriors.com.
In this episode, we would like to introduce you to Amelie Susanne Roth. Susane is a delirium and coma survivor. After an initial bacterial infection, Susane had to be placed into an induced coma that lasted 16 days. We talk about her time in the ICU and her experience of being in a coma and suffering from delirium. In this episode, we flip the script and learn firsthand about a patient's experience.
Hey, Susane, welcome to the show. Can you give us a brief background about yourself and why you are here today?
Hello. So I'm 51 years old. I'm German. Originally, I left Germany when I was 25, and I started working tourism and traveled a lot of countries until eventually I came to Miami, to the United States, about 10 years ago, where I settled down with my family, my husband and my two kids, and which I call my home now after more than 10 years. And about nearly two years ago, in July 2021, I was admitted to hospital due to an infection, and I ended up in a 2 weeks coma due to that. And I was in hospital for a month and in an induced coma for 2 weeks. And so I would like to tell about my story.
Yeah. So Susane, what was happening that caused you to go into hospital, to kind of get into that situation of where you had to be intubated and then put on sedatives, and like you said, you ended up being in a coma for about 2 weeks?
Right. So I woke up one morning. I had a pain in my throat and ear on my left side, but it felt more like a throat infection. So I had just gone through a cold. So I was thinking it was like a super infection on top of it. I went to the doctor that day and they did a strep test and it came back negative. So they sent me back home and said it was a viral infection. So the next day I was deteriorating. I was getting very weak, nauseous. I started throwing up. And so I went back to urgent care that evening. They did the same thing, COVID, strep, nothing, everything came back negative. So again, they gave me something for the nausea. They sent me back home. And that night, my throat started to swell. So it started to make like cellulitis. And then the next morning, obviously, I was getting scared about what was happening. And so my husband and I used to go to emergency hospital to do a scan. And so I was in emergency for the whole day. They did a scan. They realized it was an infection going on. I had done several abscesses. And it was very bad luck for me because it was the 4th of July weekend and I was admitted on a Friday. So basically nothing really happened until following Tuesday because 4th of July was on a Sunday. So as well, Monday was like a holiday. And so I was placed on and off on antibiotics and steroids to kind of control the infection, but nothing really happened. And so once the doctor the ENT came and saw me, and they decided to do another scan, and then they decided to do the first surgery, which was basically draining the area to relieve the pressure. And so that was the first surgery, but then the next day it started to swell again, and we did another scan, and then they decided to take me back and do another surgery to open more drains. So they had placed drains in my neck and throat. And so the second surgery was actually when they decided to keep me and put me in a coma.
And prior to that experience, how did you feel that it was 4th of July weekend? That maybe, do you feel like treatment was delayed? Do you feel like we just were doing symptom management in the hospital before we ended up going the surgery route? Like, how was your experience leading up to the conscious coma?
Totally. I mean, it was very, I was desperate because it was hard to get a doctor to see me. Obviously, there were doctors on shift. I wasn't in the ICU. I was in a normal hospital room. And so, I was like swelling, and the antibiotics didn't really kick in. And we ended up even asking for the hospital administration to see us because we were so desperate about not being seen and not getting a result or getting anywhere. So it was time we lost, I think. If someone had reacted earlier, I'm sure that maybe even the coma could have been avoided. I'm not an expert. I can't tell, because in the end, the infection was in the teeth, so they had to do the surgery. But again, it took nearly 10 days until they realized, or until they agreed to start pulling out the teeth. And it wasn't until then that the infection started to go down, the leukocytes and all the values. So I do believe that we did lose days before something happened.
Yeah. And then when you were under sedation and in the coma, what did you experience? How did it feel like? Because so I was never in a coma or anything like that, but I did have surgery, and I don't remember anything from that surgery, but I do remember coming out of surgery, and I literally thought that I like died twice. So I was wondering, because you were sedated for 2 weeks. So what did you experience in those 2 weeks? Were you aware of anything that was going on in the room? Were you aware of what was being done to you? Because sometimes when it comes to sedation, it's like you kind of have no reality, but you kind of don't. It's usually like a mix of it. Some things are real, but then it's like still fiction going on. So can you go a little bit of detail of what you experienced, what you saw, or what you felt? Correct.
Yeah. I mean, and that's actually why I decided to write a book about my experience, because it was really like a story. I mean, it was, as you say, I was going like in and out of kind of a conscious, but I was never really conscious. I was never aware what was going on. I wasn't aware I was intubated. I wasn't aware I was in a coma. So the story starts that I wake up in a bed, which I don't know where I am, obviously. And then a series of things happen, and then it's like different sceneries, right? It's like a story. So you have one day happening this, and the next day something else happens. So, I go along, and I have this, obviously it's super scary because I don't know where I am. I don't know if I'm dead. I don't know if I'm alive. I don't know if I'm in hell, in a different galaxy. I have no idea. I can't explain what's happening. And, so I see things. I see my husband. I can't tell if I really saw him or if it's also part of my delirium. I see nurses. So yeah, a couple of things happened during that time, but it's funny because, as you say, there's reality mixed with the delirium. And for example, the whole thing goes around about that I think it's a conspiracy, and they sold my body and they want to transform me into a fish, but it's like a new species that they're working on. So I think I'm in a lab, Okay. So I have this fishy smell everywhere, and then I see the fish, and I mean, that's where the red and purple fish title comes. And then I have this, I feel like they're feeding me seaweed and all that. And then once I wake up, I realize that it's the feeding tube that, and you guys know that better than me, that apparently has like a fishy, like sushi smell or something. So that's like what makes my brain think what is happening. Or I hear cracking in the wall and it looks like glass is breaking off and fish and seaweed are coming out of it. Once I'm awake, I realize that this cracking is from the, you know, the tower you have next to your bed in an ICU room. So something happens that every now and again it makes like a cracking sound. At least that what happened in my room. So my brain translated that into, you know, glass cracking off the wall. And so there are certain things that then later I realized the connection, but everything else is like, I mean, I would call it fantasy now because it's nothing real.
So something
what
we
I
do.
experienced.
Yeah, something we do in the ICU is we do a conscious sedation. So we see what is the level of consciousness the patient is experiencing. So this is usually a night shift person. We wake them up, we turn off the sedation, and we see if they're able to follow our commands, squeeze, give us a thumbs up to see what is their mental status. And I know during this time you're in a conscious coma for quite some time. Did they do a sedation vacation is what we call it, where you're able to open your eyes and understand that you're in a hospital bed or in a hospital room and then close your eyes again? Or was there family members around you when this was happening? Do you recall any of those events?
So the only event I recall is, and I can't say if it's a sedation vacation or if it's actually that they're trying to get me out of the coma. I just remember that I'm sitting up, my husband is next to me, everybody's kind of trying to calm me down. I'm super agitated, like shaking, and there are nurses and doctors around me, and then someone says, okay, no, we can't do it now, we have to wait another 2 or 3 days, and that's when I'm gone again. But I keep this thought in my mind, and I'm like, okay, so then I think, okay, 2 or 3 days have passed, what's happening? Nothing is happening. So but that's the only time that I remember. I can't remember anyone like trying to, do exercise with me or really talking to me in that sense. And
Go ahead.
no, I was saying, and I read all my medical records. I can't find anything about that in there.
Yeah, it seems like you're going through some delirium, because what you're saying is when they try to do the weaning trial, or where they try to decrease the sedation and see if you can breathe on your own and see if they can pull that tube, is we do like little trials. We wouldn't just say, hey, let's do it. We do like these little trials, and if you're able to wake up and you kind of follow commands, and Matt was saying, then we kind of pull the tube. So it seems like you had a little bit of delirium going on, because whatever you were dreaming of when you were sedated, it's almost like that's what caused your agitation when it decreased it, because you still thought you were in that lab, you still thought you were in this tank or whatever, this experiment. And that's probably what brought on your agitation, where they had to kind of then resedate you. So while you're going through this dream state, are you feeling any kind of emotions? Are you like super scared? Besides seeing all this stuff and trying to figure out this is real, this is not real, are you like scared or sad, nervous? What are your feelings? Or do you have even any feelings? Do you feel anything during this dream state?
No, I do. I mean, I'm super scared. I'm panicking because my main thought is that, oh my God, I'm not going to see my kids again. So I'm, and really things happen in my mind that I'm thinking, okay, what is going to happen with me? Where am I going? How do they transform me? Will I be like a little fish? Will I be a big fish? Will I be an edible fish? What is happening? But the scariest part is really that I don't know where I am, and that I don't know if I will ever see my family again. So I'm trying to, get in touch with my parents, who are deceased. I'm trying to get in touch with my sister, who is a spiritual healer, and I can't. I'm trying to find the light to see if I'm actually really dead already, and go over, because I have this feeling I'm in this limbo between alive and dead, which kind of is true when you're in a coma, but I'm totally trapped, obviously, because I can't talk, I can't walk, I can't even make signs. And it's a terrible desperation because you have no idea what's happening, you don't know where you're going, and there comes a point that I'd rather be dead, really. And then so I'm trying to, and again, that's delirium, but apparently I was told later that I actually tried to pull the tube. So in my delirium, I'm trying to pull the tube because I can't, I'm a person, I like to have control over my life, and being in this trap, I was freaking out, and I was like, okay, I need to end this because nothing is happening, and probably it's going to be even worse than being dead. So that was my thinking.
Yeah, I'm really glad you shared this, because as nurses, physicians, or any healthcare professional, we don't really know what's going through the mind of someone that's sedated. We just know that, hey, we have inner restraints, and when we try to wake you up, you get agitated, and that's like all we know is they get agitated. Okay, but we never really know why that happens, or we never really consider what's going on in the mind of a sedated person, because
right.
No one just, when you're sleeping, you don't just wake up agitated, right? You can't. It's almost hard for you to rationalize how can this person that we're taking off sedation be agitated? Like what's going on? And you share that, and we realize that, hey, people that are sedated are going through this dream state where they could be in a really scary place. They don't know what's going on. They can't control anything. So this is where agitation comes from. Agitation doesn't really come from the person being angry in a sense, or want to pull the tube. It just comes from they don't know where they are, and it's super scary. And once you mess with that dream state, that's like almost like messing with like a character in like a movie. It like changed a lot of things, change your perception. Yeah. So I'm really happy that you offer this. So because as nurses, we really don't know what's going on through the mind. We just know that agitated, okay, we'll try again later. But now you kind of understand where this agitation comes from, because you're literally in a dream state where you don't have control over anything that's going on.
Yeah, and usually as nurses, we tell somebody, hey, everything's okay, calm down, take a deep breath. Sometimes we give as needed medications to keep inducing the coma when you're more aware in this case. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's really tough because everything is subjective. What you're experiencing, these dreams, the purple fish and everything, it's completely valid. It was your experience that you had. And on the other side of the provider, we just can't do anything about that. Our main thing is patient safety. So if you're trying to pull your tube, if you're shouting and going, crazy in the reality world that we're in, all we could do is just do things for your safety. And that's the unfortunate part of delirium. Sometimes it increases the hospital stay. In your case, you were induced for over 16 days, and that also you have a hard time with potential maybe withdrawals from all these medications, with physical therapy, occupational therapy, getting your mobility and muscles back and everything. Mm-hmm. And how was your hospital stay now moving forward after this induced coma, when you started waking up, when you were extubated? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, first of all, obviously there's a couple of days that it's completely unbelievable what had happened. And when you start realizing what had happened, and people start telling you actually that you were in a coma. And so then the whole procedure starts, as you say. I mean, you have to learn to eat again, to swallow. So they do the test, see how good you can swallow before they give you anything to eat. Then the getting up, trying to stand, trying to walk. I had a physical therapist coming to see me maybe 3 days, and that was it. So once I was able to pull on my own underwear, I was good to go, basically. And then I was moved over to hospital room, I think after 4 days or something, and then 3 days later I was sent home. But I wasn't given any indication of what I might expect afterwards, of any follow-up, of what to do, of nothing. So there was really no. I mean, I had to kind of figure it out myself. Once back home, I started some physical therapy because my whole left shoulder was completely dislocated. due to the probably to the posture, because I have the scar on the right side, so probably they kept me more on this side. So that took me a while to get it back into shape. My voice, obviously I couldn't eat for nearly a year other than soft food because of the missing teeth. Building up some strength and putting weight on, and things like the first 4 weeks, I think my pulse rate was extremely high, and any little effort I was doing, I was sweating like crazy. And those things, it's like, it's scary because you have no idea what's happening, and until you realize it's something normal because of all your body's not used to do any effort after a month in a hospital bed. So eventually this goes away, but if you don't know anything and nobody tells you, then of course it's very scary. And then, as you say, all the medication that you received. So I'm like very much into healthy eating, nutrition. So my main concern was kind of detoxing all these meds that I had received before. So I started as good as I can to do some detoxing here and there. And but yeah, again, there was very, very little information and indication after.
So it sounds like there was a frustration with the education that was provided through the hospital for what to do afterwards, correct? And I think Peter and I could both attest that is one of the most hardest things to do in healthcare because of how limited, no one understands the back end of the hospital. But we're always trying to chart because insurances need to get billed. And the education, which in your case is probably one of the most important pieces of what to do afterwards, wasn't properly communicated because of the lack of resources for the hospital staff. And the nurse maybe was just running around being too busy because they were trying to manage you medically versus manage what's going to happen post, correct? So that your biggest frustration when it comes to the education, what you should do after your hospital stay?
The education, but also the support while you are still in the hospital. I mean, I was in the hospital for another week after I woke up. And so I would have liked to have like a little bit more of psychological support, after everything you've just gone through, to have someone at least see you, visit you, because I mean, the PTSD you have after that is tremendous. And I mean, I had to go through therapy after, because I got to a stage that I couldn't cope with my life. I was like, it was too overwhelming that everybody, once you have a little bit weight on and you start moving normally, everybody thinks you're back to normal, and you're not, because you still have nightmares, you still have a lot of fears. So also that part, nobody kind of gives you some ideas what to do. I think there's a lot of things that can help, from acupuncture to other trauma methods to release trauma, and so it's a complete what comes afterwards that's missing. And as you say, doctors are busy. It was July 21, so in the middle of COVID, the hospitals were filling up. I can't understand all that, but the families are also lost, so they have no idea what to expect once you're home. And I think, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to write that book, because I think it can help a lot families as well to understand what's happening before, during, and after. I wasn't given the option, nor was my husband, to if we have to intubate you, are you okay to be in a coma? That was never on the table. I know that's not a common practice. It always goes hand in hand, but nobody ever mentioned the possibility to us that could happen. So obviously my husband, my family were as overwhelmed as you would be in that situation with no information from the doctors. And I'm a person, I like to know, and I like to ask questions, but you get the feeling that they prefer you not to know anything and not to ask questions. Just let me do my job and move on.
Yeah. Medicine is almost seems like just reactive, especially the hospital. You come in, we treat you, you leave. And it's very protocol too. Like when you referred to your book, you mentioned that they couldn't figure out the source of your infection, but because all they were seeing was like abscess in your throat, and they were draining the abscess, and they couldn't figure out the location of the actual infection. And it shows you that it's so protocol that sometimes looking outside the box is very difficult for physicians.
Exactly.
The infection ended up being your teeth, but that was the last place they looked. But if they were able to maybe have more independence in the way they do things, maybe that would have been caught sooner. Because so a common person, it might seem like, oh, well, if it's an infection in your throat, maybe it's coming from the teeth. But if you're so protocol where you have to do A, B, C, D, and E, you don't have time to think outside the box, because if you don't do A, B, C, and D, well, guess what? You might get in trouble because you didn't go because you went against the protocol.
Yeah.
Because maybe, because they have this perfect way of doing things where they have this model that's supposed to fit every patient, but it really doesn't. So do you think at some point medicine failed you? Not necessarily the physicians, because physicians can only do what they can, and they're taught the way they're taught. So do you think medicine has failed you, or a hospital, or the system?
I think it's the bureaucracy of the hospital. I mean, I'm not saying anything negative about the doctors. They did their job. They did what they had to do. But I think it's the administration of the whole complex, because it's several, that, as you say, they go through their ABCD whatever protocol, and even if they lose time, that's the way you have to go. And if on the way there the patient dies, well, that's what happens. So that was my feeling, and I think that's what's happening. And I had confirmation of that. And again, I mean, we tried to talk to admin staff in the hospital before I was placed in coma, but we didn't get anywhere, because of course they don't change their approach because of one patient. But that's the way it works, unfortunately. And I liked to refer to Dr. House, because this component was missing, someone who's like, what could it be? And it was actually my husband who pushed them to start looking into the teeth. He pushed hard for them to do it, because maybe otherwise they would have lost more days even. So.
And Susan, going back to you being sedated, a lot of times people would say that go through like an end of life experience. You said there was a point where you just wanted to kind of give up, but the thought of leaving your kids just wouldn't allow you to do that. Did you like see a light at the end of the tunnel? Was there any kind of life or death experience that you kind of went through while being sedated?
No, I didn't have that. I mean, the only, as I said before, when I was trying to pull the tube, and then I have this experience that, I try to take my breath, and it's getting less and less and harder until someone comes and puts the mask on my face. Again, I don't know if that was real or not. I think it was more the delirium, but that was the only experience I had that I thought I was getting close to death, but I didn't see anything. I didn't see a light. I didn't know. From what they told me, I was close to death eventually at some point, but it didn't translate into my experience being in the coma. So I think it's, from what I heard and talking to other survivors, I think that happens more when people are in a natural coma than in an induced. Then they often have these near-death experiences. But the nightmares are very typical for the induced comas.
And one of the areas you mentioned that healthcare providers could be a better service to is the psychological stress, the trauma they experienced throughout the stay. So you told us that there was not much psychological support throughout the stay, or maybe even post. So how did you decide to cope with the traumatic experience that you were having, such as maybe physiological symptoms or maybe vivid dreams? How did you go about that? I think you mentioned therapy, but how did this process look like? When were you aware that, hey, I need psychological support, this is something that's affecting my quality of life?
So in the very beginning, like maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, when I was able to write again and hold a laptop on my legs, I started to write down like the first draft of what now became the book, which was helpful. It was hard for me, but it was helpful to start writing everything down. But then probably a couple of months, probably like 6 months later, I suddenly started to realize, as I had mentioned before, like people saw you already as normal, and I realized I was not. So I was afraid of catching COVID. I was afraid of crowds of people. I was afraid of going out of my house. I did start driving again pretty soon, but I was really afraid of a lot of things, and I was working again from home and half time, but I had to be there. I couldn't just go into bed and lock me up and say, okay, I'm going into depression now. So that's when I realized I had to do something, and I didn't want to talk to anyone about it, because I was like, okay, my husband really had enough. He has gone through so much. I don't want to talk to him about what I'm experiencing now. My friends, the same thing. I think they were already like done. They didn't want to hear it again and over and over. So that's when I decided to look for someone outside, someone who can really ask the right questions and let me tell my story and can offer advice, professional advice. And it was really successful, the therapy I did. It was like a combination of speech therapy and also some tapping and relaxing, and it really helped me. I did it for a couple of months, nearly a year after actually, and it, I went through a traumatic scene, and after that I was like, I think I'm good now. And since then I'm good. I don't have any nightmares anymore. I mean, I must admit that going through the book writing and publishing, and now like kind of talking about the subject again nearly on a daily basis, obviously brings back everything, but it's also good because I think it has to be said. And I'm happy that a lot of people start reading the book and realize what's going on. And especially with COVID, that so many people were placed in a coma. You guys know better than me that probably you've seen many more than before. And so I personally, I think the only thing I have left is a little bit of ADHD. So I'm like, constantly have to do several things at a time, and I get bored very, very fast, but I can live with it. It's okay.
And did you have that little bit of ADHD before, or was that the little bit of ADHD come after?
In that way, it came after. No, before I always like to be someone being busy, like busy at the job and having stuff to do, but I wouldn't have called it ADHD at that time. But now I call it ADHD myself. I haven't been diagnosed with it, but I realized that I have issues concentrating sometimes on, like, I watch a movie and I need to do stuff on my phone, or listening to a conversation, I drift away depending on what's it about. So I have issues to concentrate, but again, it's okay.
Yeah, I have a theory why that kind of happens. I think that then what happens, because I've heard that from a handful of people that go through these kind of situations where they have like a life or death situation, or they do get put under sedation, is they have a little bit of like you said, a little bit of ADHD. And I'm thinking where this stems from. I think like subconsciously that your body almost went through a state where it was basically dead. That it's almost like now, since you're almost, you could say, reborn, you kind of want to do as much as you can, because it's almost like your body kind of senses that you don't want to be put back into that state. So it's almost trying to take advantage of like every single thing that you're doing at the same time. Doesn't want to like miss out on anything.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
And did you have any kind of breakthrough realizations? Has your attitude changed, or maybe your mindset, or maybe the things that you take for granted when you came out of the sedation and after getting intubated? Has any of your thoughts changed, the way you look at life?
For sure. I mean, being German, and maybe that's one of our, like, we start to plan ahead and we start to be on the safe side. And I mean, my husband is Latin, so it's we balance it out. But I think I'm much more living the day now. Like, I think in the future, but I'm not like worried anymore. It's more this attitude, you don't even know what's going to happen. Tomorrow it can be dead, so better enjoy life today and don't worry about tomorrow. So that has definitely changed the way I see things. I get upset much less than before, because so many things that we worry about and we get upset about, which it's not necessary. What else? Yeah, I mean, I'm still afraid of dying, but I'm not as afraid of death anymore, because I also already before I was a believer of there's something afterlife, but now I kind of believe it more, even though I didn't have a near-death experience, but I still feel that something was there to get me out of it. And, if you call it God or something, so I don't know, but we all have our date when it's time to go. And in my case, it wasn't. So that I got that really clear when all this happened. So yeah, that definitely changed. I like to help people. I like to talk about my experience because I think it's helpful. I know a lot of people that suffer, they lock themselves up. And it's hard to cope, especially when your surrounding and your family, your friends don't understand what happened and what's going on in your mind, and that life has changed and attitude has changed. But luckily, in my case, I don't have any health issues afterwards, and I came out pretty good shape. So, yeah.
I think that's a beautiful part in life, that any single event, both good or bad, the way we view it, there can be some lessons or realizations that we can learn. So in your case, you, even though this was traumatic, it was 16 days of an induced coma, you had nightmares, you still found some meaning into it to help you cope with it, but also have a higher quality of life, where now maybe you're not as fixed on this mentality of I'm going to die, I need to do a lot of things right away, or it increased your faith and spirituality with the higher power, who you choose to, to associate that to be the higher power. And with all these experiences, when did you have this light bulb moment that clicked, that I feel inspired to write this book? Where did your passion come from?
Well, again, in the beginning, I wrote down, because it was funny when I came out of the coma. I was so overwhelmed what I had lived during the coma, because it was really like a story from the beginning to the end. Like, some people have like flashes and certain experiences, but it's not related. And in my case, it was like really a whole. So I woke up and was like, oh my God, I can make a movie of this, really, because it's so weird. It's so out of everything. And then I started writing everything down, not to forget about it. But then I left it there for a few months and didn't write anymore and didn't continue until probably sometime last year, summer last year, when I thought that I really need to do a book, because I really, in the first idea was definitely because I wanted for my kids, so they can one day read about it and understand what happened, because they had no idea. They didn't see me for a month, but they had no idea what was going on. Obviously because of their age as well. And so I did it primarily for them. And then, as I said, also to help people and to make the medical staff better understand what's going on. So that was my motivation to do it. And I'm glad I did it. I'm really glad. That somehow it worked out. I don't think I'm going to write another book, probably. I don't consider myself a writer, but I'm glad I did it.
Susan, can you share a little bit about your life outside of being a patient? Because as nurses, when we just see our patient, we just see them just as patients. I'll be honest with you, not a lot of times we pay attention to or even learn about what our patients are outside of the hospital, outside of being a patient. Can you give us a little bit of insight on about your life and how your life was before the induced coma? I know as a kid you mentioned that you had anorexia, you had a little bit of a struggle with that. So can you give us a little bit of insight on how your life was prior to being a patient or outside of being a patient?
Well, not from the outside perspective, not too much has changed. So I have been working in tourism. Before all this happened, I was working for a hotel company. I had my kids, so my daily routine. COVID came, and we all worked from home. And my parents died a long time ago. I was still in Germany when they died. So I still have family in Germany, but my sister is still there, who I'm very close with. But yeah, as I said in the beginning, Miami has really become my home. And I can imagine staying here. And when after all that happened, I think the biggest change was probably that before I was still very much focused on my career and doing career and being successful. And after that, my focus went more on doing something that I enjoy, that I'm, something that I still in my area. I'm still working in tourism, but I changed jobs last year because I just needed something new, and also I needed a new environment, because working in the company I used to work before everything happened did remind me in some ways of everything that happened 2 years ago, and the atmosphere was not anymore the one I wanted. So I changed job, and I just try to do a good job, but it's not like I want to continue doing career or making more money. Or it's really about enjoying my day to day, enjoying my kids. That's my priority, really. Because the thought of them not having me around anymore was the worst during the coma. And so I'm really trying to enjoy it to the fullest, as much as I can. Other than that, I can't really say that I changed that much before and after, other than what I mentioned before, that I really take it more like day by day.
Yeah. So Susane, when you're doing all this traveling, because you originally ran away from living in Germany to travel to take on these different roles work in different hospitals. What did travel bring to you? What did it give you? Why did you enjoy traveling? Has it taught you anything, or what was that pull that always brought you to travel? Because you went to, I think it was Cuba, then you went to London. You traveled quite a bit of the world. What was pulling you to traveling, and what did you learn through it?
Well, it was because of my job, so it was kind of excuse me. So I never thought actually of leaving Germany. It was by chance that I ended up going to Spain. So I lived in Spain. I was offered a job. Then I went to Cuba. Then I offered another job. I went to England, and it definitely made my perspective and my horizon wider. I lived in Egypt. I lived in Mexico, and I always try to live with the people, with the culture, understand other cultures, and adapt myself, and not like locking myself up and continue living the way I live. So I think traveling for all of us can, it's not only going on vacation and relaxing, not working for a week or two. I think we should always try to learn something and to be open-minded about other cultures and other habits. And in my case, because I lived in other countries, which makes it obviously makes it much easier to get into the culture. But it was a great experience. I would do it again for sure. Like now with my family, and as I said before, right now I consider Miami my home, but that doesn't mean that maybe in 5 years we decide to pack up again and move somewhere else. So that option always exists, because there's so many nice places in this world. And luckily we can do that, no? We can move around, and you became travel nurses, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah.
And that's a beautiful part
travel for me has always been. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's a beautiful part of traveling. You get to see other places, but also you get to learn about yourself. So, you don't go to Paris and find yourself, but through these experiences, through the unknown uncertainty, you learn about your character, who you are, your values, and you're able to create this character so you could better
That's right.
carry on through life. And one last question we'd like to ask all of our guests before we end the show. So if you had the opportunity to have a cup of coffee one last time with anybody, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Oh, it would for sure be my mom. Both of my parents, but with my mother, I think, there's so many questions. I'm 51 now, so I'm going through this period which is not easy for women, and so many questions I would like to ask her, and obviously her getting to know my grandchildren, my children, her grandchildren, and we weren't too close when I was young, or when she was alive. I mean, we were close, but not like the typical, not like me with my kids. So I'm like probably overprotective, and she wasn't like that. And I understand now why, because she also wanted to live her life, and my sister and I were already grown up or older, so she had all the right to do that. And I think that's something which I learned, and I kind of now forgive her for that she really went on with her life and enjoyed and traveled and did everything she wanted to do, and not so much looking after her kids who were already grown-ups. But it would be great to have a conversation with her, definitely.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because growing up, we almost see in a way of where our parents kind of failed us. Not that they do it on purpose, they just don't know that that's happening. And it's like almost like your responsibility when you have kids is to fill those holes where your parents had holes in their parenting, and it's like almost like your job to fill those holes. That way, your children could experience almost a better childhood and family life than what you've experienced with your parents.
That's right. Yeah. At least in my case, I like to to give all this love and dedication to my kids, which, don't get me wrong, it's not that I didn't get it from my parents, but it was different times as well. I think like everything was so independent and let your kids run. I mean, it was 70s, 80s, so it was different times probably.
And Susan, where can people find a link, or where can people find the book if they're interested in purchasing it?
So the book is mainly on Amazon, Kindle available as well, but you can also find it on Walmart, Target, Barnes & Nobles. Most of the online providers offer it.
Okay, that's amazing. And we'll add the link to the show notes for anybody that's curious. So again, thank you for coming on the show and talking about your experience about delirium, what it was in being a patient in the hospital. We don't talk to many patients outside of the hospital because we just take care of their most critical moments. So we have a lot of listeners that are nurses. So thank you for sharing that experience. And it's a great reflection to what we can improve, just like you mentioned, the psychological support and the other things that maybe we as healthcare providers fail at times. So thank you for coming here and sharing your experience. Right. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me. And I think it's also important that we as patients recognize you guys and all the work you do, because there were so many people looking after me, which I never met in person. And that's also why I wanted to dedicate the book to them, because I know it's an incredible job that you do. And obviously, thanks to the entire staff, I'm still here, because in the end, they did their job and they did what they had to do. So thank you for sharing that with you.